Some contractors have countered these offers. Some have asked for forgivable loans. Why? Because they don't want to incur additional debt on top of financial losses. Others have asked to be paid time and material for skeleton staffs that they have retained to take ESA calls, respond to emergency calls, or process administrative paperwork. Some have proposed extending the ESA program year to 2021 so they have more time to pay back the advance. Others have proposed a resiliency charge, a pay-for-performance repayment measure through which contractors would earn an agreed-upon amount for every completed unit. The reimbursement measure would be earned by contractors as they complete treated ESA units and would generate revenue necessary to pay off in advance without depriving contractors of funds necessary to sustain ongoing wages, benefits, and fixed overhead. When the programs are reopened, our intent is to ramp up as quickly as possible, but much is still unforeseen. Contractors have shared with me that if we were to get 50% of our pre-COVID volume, it would take approximately 20 to 25% of each of our invoice to pay off the advances or loans in 1 year. That can be pretty hard on a contractor. There are also some policy changes that might help us get the work volume up, such as removing first touches, like was implemented with Aliso Canyon, raising income qualification using AMI or SMI, and self-certification of newly laid off individuals who may not be rehired when restrictions are lifted. And I want to close with health and safety. The IOUs and contractors have always put safety first. The standard is now more important than ever. Contractors must retain a B or better with ISN Networld and the organization that oversees contractor safety records, policies, and procedures. But for the foreseeable future, it will not be business as usual delivering ESA programs. I know the IOUs are working together to streamline customer-facing enrollment assessments to other methods. Contractors, too, are thinking of how best to protect their employees when the programs open up, including PPE and training for energy assessors and our weatherization installers. This will add additional cost to contractors struggling to ramp up and pay off loans needed to retain employees and stay in the business. In closing, I will say through all of this, serving the low-income community by delivering ESA programs will while keeping the contractor network financially viable and keeping good jobs in their communities is the challenges that we all face. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Next up is Greg.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. First, many thanks to the Commission for organizing today's COVID workshop and for giving me the honor to speak today on behalf of California's energy efficiency industry. My name is Greg Wickler. I'm Executive Director of the California Efficiency and Demand Management Council. What I'll do quickly is give you an overview of the Council and then outline the challenges that we're seeing and the solutions that we've been actively pursuing in response to the COVID-19 crisis. The Council is a member-based organization comprised of more than 60 companies and organizations that deliver energy efficiency and demand management services to all types of energy users throughout the state of California. Our members directly employ thousands of Californians, leading to many more thousands of additional secondary jobs through contractor and end-user training, installers, skilled engineers, technicians, marketing agents, and survey specialists. We advocate at the CPUC, also at the CEC and CAISO, and with state legislators and the governor's office. And the purpose of our advocacy initiatives is to push for better outcomes for our members and ultimately for the efficiency and demand management industry. So I wanted to take a moment to describe the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and how it has impacted California's efficiency and demand management industry.
Do you want to see how web?
As Ed and there's a bit of background noise, thanks. As Ed and Pat noted earlier, this pandemic has really ripped through our state's clean energy industry. With regard to energy efficiency, we've seen rapid drop-offs in activities leading to furloughs and layoffs that are impacting a significant portion of the 320,000 plus efficiency and demand management workforce in our state. we have major concerns that we're about to permanently lose the infrastructure to deliver efficiency resources, which has really taken decades to build up and just can't be restored overnight. We're also worried about the ambitious carbon reduction policies, and we're worried that we will not be realizing those goals set forth in the policies as a result of the current situation. So what I'd like to now focus on in the rest of my remarks is what the Council is doing on behalf of our members right now to help promote the efficiency and demand management resources as what we think is a key element to help accelerate California's economic recovery. Our state-based advocacy efforts have taken a two-pronged focus. First, we're working with the CPUC leadership on immediate short-term solutions that will help the efficiency industry right now and immediately after the shelter-in-place orders are eased. And I want to emphasize that these solutions can be realized while taking all the safety precautions once the orders, the shelter-in-place orders are lifted, and most importantly, without asking for additional funding authorizations. Some of the ideas that we floated include a relaxation of cost-effectiveness project and portfolio threshold requirements to TRCs of 1.0 or lower. We've asked to rescind gross realization rates and net to gross discounts and allow full effective useful lifetimes for all retrofit measures. We've asked to allow projects that have already been completed to be validated through remote methods. We're asking to speed up review steps for the custom and NMEC projects in particular. And we've asked that the CPUC order the IOUs to immediately restore non-resource programs such as workforce education and training, marketing education and outreach, and various behavior-based programs that include online marketplaces. Secondly, we're engaging with the CPUC and our elected leaders in Sacramento to identify longer-term solutions to some of the most pressing issues that are hampering both the EE and DR resources, particularly at a time when those resources are essential ingredients for preserving jobs for many thousands of Californians and helping consumers save money during this unprecedented time of economic uncertainty. So firstly, we're pursuing significant reform of cost-effectiveness methods and approaches. Secondly, we'd like to see better alignment of the energy efficiency goal-setting process with our state's carbon reduction policies, including Senate Bill 350's provision to double efficiency by 2030. And thirdly, we'd like to see a requirement for more energy efficiency and demand response resources to be included in wholesale market efforts, including resource adequacy. Finally, I'll briefly mention some of the work that we're doing at the national level, working with groups like the Alliance to Save Energy and other organizations to advocate for clean energy-related considerations as part of the CARES 2 stimulus package that's being considered right now by Congress. We're building a coalition and proposing a small business and schools energy efficiency block grant program that would work and complement with our existing utility-based energy efficiency programs. We'll continue working through all the various venues that we have available to us to ensure that efficiency and demand management are front and center in California's efforts to bring back our economy from the terrible effects of this pandemic. And I just want to, again, thank the Commission for organizing today's workshop. And Sarah, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Greg. And just a reminder that if we can try to focus on challenges in this panel, I know it bleeds into solutions as well. But we'll have an opportunity to talk about that as well for the future panelists, a reminder. And MC, if you could please bring up Brad's slides as he is the next speaker. Thank you. Brad, you're on.
Okay, great. Hello, thank you. Really appreciate this workshop happening and the opportunity to participate in it. Brad Hebner, I'm Policy Director for the California Solar and Storage Association. I feel like I'm cheating a little bit by having slides, but we did a survey of our members, and some of the graphics from that I thought would be really good for everyone to look at. So go ahead to the next slide. And we sent out a survey to all of CALSA member companies. We have 550 members of the association. I was quite pleased that we got 212 responses. 212 companies were willing to fill out pretty detailed information about recent business activity compared to previous business activity. And this is very recent. It's just in the past several days that these responses happened, and it's from a wide cross-section of types of businesses involved in clean energy. So if you go to the next slide. It's not a big surprise that it's had a negative impact on business. Nearly everyone, so what is that, 92% of companies responding said there's been a negative impact on their business, split half and half between extremely negative and somewhat negative. Interesting, the significant improvement, one company said significant improvements happens to be a company in solar thermal space, so maybe people are caring a little more about sustainable hot water at the moment. And then, there's some software companies clearly that are helping people transition to remote sales, and they're getting a lot more subscribers right now. But by and large, this is not a surprise. It's had extremely negative impact on a lot of companies. The next slide, please. There have been a lot of layoffs, pay cuts, and furloughs. It's impacting most companies, all but 30%. So 70% of companies have had some kind of reduction. Nearly a quarter of companies are shut down altogether, not doing business for the time being. And then there is, I guess, 46% that have some combination of layoffs, furloughs, and pay cuts. And this, these stories are all over. The companies have had to very quickly downsize and lay people off and reduce pay. So it's really heartbreaking, and it's happening all over the place. Looking at the numbers of everyone who responded and the number of jobs before and since COVID, they have laid off a total of 21% of all of their employees. And this is a combination, I think, of furloughs and layoffs. So taking those things together. And if that is consistent across the entire industry, this is 15,000 layoffs in solar and storage sectors, which I think it sounds about right to me, because we see the statewide unemployment numbers and they're very big. So 15,000 people losing their jobs just within solar and storage in the past month. Next slide, please. And then it's happening across the board. It's hitting the smaller companies a little harder. For the smallest of companies, around 44% of their jobs have been cut on average. And then for the largest companies, it's a 15% job reduction. So it's happening across the board, probably hitting the smaller companies a little harder. The next slide. Impact on sales. Again, a lot of companies are shut down altogether. Interesting how some people responded to this shutdown question a little bit differently, where previously it said 24% of companies are completely shut down. I think that means 24% are not issuing payroll whatsoever, but some of those have a little bit of sales happening in the background, probably just by the sole proprietor responding to organic referrals, but 11% are not even doing that, have zero contact with customers. And then obviously, there's a lot of reduced sales. We have 72% of companies say it's more than a 25% reduction in sales. 89% total have some reduction in sales. And then there's that 1%. I think there's one category that's not in the legend there, that 1%, which is more than 25% increase from that one thermal company. So clearly a very severe impact. The numbers bear out what we would expect to see. And the next slide, please. In terms of how many permits are being issued throughout the state, a small company in San Diego called Home Analytics is pulling permit data from representative cities throughout the state. And this is what we've seen. We got down to about half of pre-COVID permitting activity. Interesting little uptick last week, which could be encouraging. Don't know if that's just a little ebb and flow or the start of another trend. In all, I have to say I'm impressed this isn't worse, and a lot of credit goes to local jurisdictions that are trying hard to issue permits. Now, some of these permits in some counties, especially Bay Area counties, are coming with a notice saying, here's your permit, but don't install this right now. You know, we're processing the permit, but you'll have to wait till later to actually act on it. You have 10 months or whatever the timeline is to act on the permit. So this doesn't mean that this amount of business activity is continuing, but I'm very pleased. CALSA has worked a lot with local jurisdictions to transition to online permit submittal and remote inspections through video. And I've been very pleased at the number that have been willing to go down that road and try really hard to keep the business flowing during this time. But still, you know, even with all that, down 50% and more needs to be done there. Final slide, and you don't necessarily need to leave this up if you don't want, but the longer this happens, the harder it will be to crawl out. And the biggest things there are cash flow problems and maintaining a pipeline. And I hear this over and over from companies that the importance of cash flow. You're especially a small company, but the big companies, just the same. They've got, you know, money in, money out, and it's a very delicate balance. In terms of staffing, getting the right combination of sales and installers and administration and designers and warehouse is a very difficult balance. And, you know, companies, many of them had a certain flow going on, and now we've all gone through the blender, and it'll be hard to come out the other end. The longer this goes on, solid business. And, you know, it's the chicken and egg. If you don't have employees, you can't develop a pipeline. If you don't have a pipeline, it's hard to pay employees. And, you know, the more that breaks apart, the harder it is to rebuild. Just a couple of final thoughts on some companies are, you know, you hear heartbreaking stories that company presidents or, you know, small companies paying employees out of their own pocket because they care about their employees and their company, but that obviously can't go on very long. Lots of stories about Paycheck Protection Program. And
this is Sarah. Just we're at time, so important points there. And just try to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, one final thing, you know, the impact on customers is hard when it's like municipal customers that have been counting on powering up their solar and getting the savings, and they're not getting that, and you know, those delays are compounded right now because cash is a problem for everybody. And then the last thought is the impact on low and medium income customers, where credit gets tighter for everybody. And that makes it harder for folks at the end, the final customers, to meet the credit requirements. And, you know, it all gets tightened up throughout the chain, and it becomes difficult to maintain affordability for customers. So those few highlights of impacts that we found.
Thank you, Brad. Really appreciate it. Next, we're moving on to Abigail, who also has a few slides to show.
Okay. Good morning. I'll let you put them.
Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the CPUC for this opportunity to present this information this morning. I'm Abigail Solis. I work for Self-Help Enterprises. We are a nonprofit organization based out of the San Joaquin Valley in Visalia, California. Last year, we were awarded the role of Community Energy Navigator Program Manager for the San Joaquin Valley pilot projects. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to go over The challenges that we are facing dealing with COVID-19, but I also wanted to provide a different perspective and ensure that we consider the challenges that our residents are facing as well. Next slide. So just a little bit of background for those who may not be as familiar. The San Joaquin Valley Affordable Energy Pilot Projects, they are pilot projects in 11 communities in the San Joaquin Valley. And the goal is to provide access to affordable, clean, and renewable energy to these communities. Participating customers will receive new energy efficient appliances to replace old propane and wood burning ones. They will also receive utility bill discounts, and we will be helping them to enroll into additional bill saving programs. Next slide. So, you know, I always felt it's important when we talk about the SJV pilot projects to talk about the significance of the pilots and what it means to the residents that we're serving. This proceeding started with a large effort of residents and local nonprofit organizations rallying together to assist communities that have been faced with decades of energy inequity. You know, most of these communities have, you know, they lack access to basic natural gas infrastructure and other resources. And, you know, in the absence of access to this basic energy infrastructure and services, residents, although they are usually more poor and lower income than other communities in the state, they are forced to pay higher costs for propane. They're also burning wood in their homes. And so they have been asking for support for cost saving measures for decades. So obviously the cost saving measures and the benefits of these pilots have been long anticipated, and residents are waiting for them to happen. Next slide. I just want to take a moment to realize and think about the real life challenges that our residents are facing right now. I think for us in the industry, it's easy to talk about how COVID-19 is affecting us, it's affecting our businesses, and it's affecting our workforce. And I think that the previous panelists did a great job in going over that information. However, it's really important to think about how this pandemic is affecting the residents that we are trying to serve. You know, most residents right now are feeling fearful in one way or another, right? Because obviously there are health concerns. People are getting sick, and parents want to keep their families safe. Many of the communities that we're serving in the San Joaquin Valley are already low-income communities, but many of them, as other areas of the state, are dealing with income reduction. They're not working as much as they used to, or perhaps, you know, they're considered, non-essential, and they don't have the option to work from home like the rest of us. So not having access to regular income has led to other major concerns for families. Many families are dealing with food insecurities right now. You know, in the San Joaquin Valley, any food giveaway or food pantry line is long these days. There's hundreds of people waiting to get food every day. We're also dealing with the housing crisis, where we still haven't received enough securities to make sure that our families do not lose their housing if they can't pay their rent. And also, it's important to know, if you're familiar with the San Joaquin Valley, this is the heart of agriculture in California. Many of our residents work they're farm laborers. They work in the farms every day. And as you may have heard, they are considered essential. So they are still getting up every morning and going to work so they can pick the food, the crops that the rest of the state eats. This is, of course, also adding an extra layer of tension and stress because not all families can stay home and shelter in place. They have to get up and they have to work. And on top of this, also we all know students are home right now. They're not going to school. So parents that are forced to get up, go to work in the farms are still having to figure out a way to best assist their students that are at home during this time. All these things are really just real life conditions that the residents that we are trying to serve are dealing with and thinking about right now. Next slide. So for us, our role at South Help Enterprises as the community energy navigators, together with our partner organizations, is really to get these pilot projects started with outreach, education, enrollment activities. So, naturally, COVID-19 presents a challenge for us because what we are used to doing, how we, consider adequate community outreach to our residents, is no longer an option for us. So normally, we would go door to door. We would have community meetings. We meet with people in person on a regular basis. And the original plan for this work involved, doing these things and having in-home appointments with residents, assisting them with these applications so they can move on to the next stage of the pilot. So, obviously those things we cannot do right now. And I know in the next panel we'll talk about solutions, but we have taken some time to figure out, well, what can we do and how can we make sure to stay in communication with our residents throughout this time? We've thought of things like phone calls, phone appointments, emails, texting, mailing, and of course using social media. And we'll go over that more in the next panel. Next slide.
Abigail, let's make sure and keep those for the next panel because we're running low on time.
Okay, so of course, it's important to note when it comes to pilot implementation, so the next step, of course, we have to figure out what we can and can't do. At this time, project implementers cannot do in-home assessments. Obviously, anything else done in the home, like home remediation and appliance conversion, is also at a pause right now. Next slide. So I think I'll stop here and pull up these slides as we continue the conversation this afternoon.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Our next presenter is Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah, and to the rest of the CPUC for teeing this up. This is a great workshop to be addressing this at this time. I'm Matt Duesterberg. I'm the founder of OhmConnect. Sarah, I don't know if you received my slides or were able to get those in. But happy to walk through those. But Abigail did a great tee up anyway, and I think, Ed, thank you for providing kind of the context around this. I really want to kind of focus on the end users, the people here. And part of what we've seen in our data is that while electricity consumption has decreased as a kind of broad-based reduction over the past month or so, residential use has actually increased significantly. And that increase can be on the order of about 50%, and it's for disadvantaged communities in the Central Valley. And this is really because where the energy usage is increasing the most is during those kind of middle of the day time period. Sarah, I don't know if you had these slides or. Okay, that's fine. So
I didn't receive them.
Okay, yeah, no worries. So what you'll see in, the slides would be helpful in this, but the actual increase of residential usage, as not surprisingly, is right in the middle of the day. And so that's for Central Valley, that's when the AC needs to run. And so those times are the most kind of energy rich times in the middle of the day and really impactful for the residential homes. So take this in context with the fact that a lot of Americans are already energy insecure. And what that means is they don't know if they can pay their utility bill on a month-to-month basis. This is before COVID-19. So post-COVID-19, you've got increase in energy usage. You've got kind of, as Ed alluded to, a potential increase from the overall rates, 20 to 30% due to wildfires. And then all of a sudden, we're in a place that's actually a very dangerous place for them financially. Now, on the other hand, there's actually a big opportunity. We have lots of people at home wanting to do something They want to take an action to take control of their electricity usage. And right now, that's very difficult. The way that the rates are structured, if they reduce 1 kilowatt in the middle of the day, it's the exact same as 1 kilowatt in the peak. And there's lots of ways to skin the cat, but there's a lot of discussion around just giving cash to users, cash to low-income customers. And I know at least one CCA who's giving a straight bill credit. And it feels kind of like the old adage. Thank you, Ed, for breaking the old adages. I feel like this is even earlier. But I feel like we're giving someone a fish and we're feeding them for a day, but we're not really teaching them to fish. And they really can control their electricity use. And one thing that we've done, so just a little bit of background on Ohm Connect, is we pay users to reduce their electricity 1 or 2 times a week. We send a text message or an email, and if they reduce for 1 hour, we basically pay them for each kilowatt they saved. And what we found is our users want more of these events during this time, because this is an opportunity for them to make money and control their electricity usage during these 1 or 2 times a week. And what we found is this is a smart plug. This is a very simple solution to basically teaching the man to fish, which is this is about $9 to purchase. And over the course of a year, it'll make up anywhere between $20 to $40 of value by connecting this to the electricity markets. And so it's a net win. And if we can get these into homes of all of the California homes that are facing this really increase in bills, that could be on the order of $300 to $400 million back into pockets of these California residents. We've already paid out $10 million to our customers across the past couple of years, mainly in kind of the Central Valley. And what I really want us to focus on is we're in a crisis, but we will eventually get somewhat back to normalcy. There's kind of 2 pathways to get there. One is we spend a lot of money to get to that normalcy, and we're hanging on by the thread. Or is there a pathway that we not only get to normalcy, but we actually build a better, more resilient grid as a result? So just an example is, instead of giving users $50 in bill credit, can't 3 smart plugs that will generate $50 to $100 a year in bill credits over the course of a year, every year. And on the flip side, the grid will have devices on all these plugs that they can control. So when there's a price spike of $1,000 in the day-ahead market, we can have users turn off this without them lifting a finger. It automatically happens, and we get to a better, more resilient grid as we come out of COVID-19. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Our final panelist is Alex.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the panel. I really appreciate the insights my panelists have provided. And I think the rest of the day is going to be a really interesting discussion when we get into solutions. I'm Alex Loomer. I'm Director of Public Policy for ChargePoint, and we're the world's largest electric vehicle charging network. We produce both the hardware and the software for public and private L2 and DC fast chargers. I just want to start by saying it's been so great to see the Bay Area, followed by the state, take such quick action to issue these shelter-in-place orders, and we're seeing that pay off now. We've led on climate for a number of years, and now we're stepping up and leading on the COVID response. So I could not be happier to be in California while this is all unfolding. As many of you know, the state order sets a floor, but counties are able to issue their own orders that can be more restrictive, like the construction limitations that we're seeing in the Bay Area. So we have to be sure that we're both complying with the state order, but tracking, potentially 58 counties as they implement their own orders, and making sure that we're complying with all the relevant orders that are out there. And then beyond that, each utility and company might be taking their own actions over and above whatever relevant orders are in their territory. So of course, our top concern is keeping our employees and our customers safe and healthy during this time, while we're also doing what we can to provide the EV chargers to support the state's transportation and climate goals. The biggest challenge by far has been keeping the field work going. PG&E has halted field work such as site walks, inspections, energizing sites, but they are still processing applications. But as you can imagine, the ability to process the applications and wait lists is going to be even more difficult if the IOUs aren't able to go out and assess the potential locations. And then on top of that, we're seeing a real slowdown at city offices for permitting. Some cities have closed their offices altogether, others are operating, but the process is still extremely slower than what we're used to. So all of that combined just makes for a very slow process to get these chargers in the ground. As I mentioned, and I'll loop back to this, the IOUs are treating this slightly differently. So there isn't exactly consistency among the programs. While SCE and SDG, for example, are still doing field work, but at a slower rate, PG&E has taken a more conservative approach. So it would be helpful to have a more clear direction and standardization from the regulatory agencies regarding what is essential and can continue during the shelter-in-place orders. We've gotten this direction from the governor's office, but we need to be sure we're getting it also for the energy sector, including the distributed energy, storage, and EV charging issues that have been touched on on this panel. The IOU programs for EV chargers, I think, are going to be even more important going forward as the economy is slowing down and many businesses are having to cut expenses. And meanwhile, the state funding is also being redirected to COVID response. So I think focusing on job creation and growth is definitely going to be a priority as we recover and come out of this recession. And looking to our industry, and I think green tech in general, it's growing, it's creating new jobs, and we have an opportunity to sustain ourselves during this period and use that momentum to make the changes that we all want to see as we emerge from in a post-COVID world. So I think, just to end on a high note, GHG emissions are down globally. The air quality is better than we've seen in years. So I think we're getting a sneak peek of what the world can look like without so many gas cars on the road. And transportation electrification is key to addressing climate change. So we need to be sure that we aren't slowing down our momentum as we move forward. So I really look forward to the panel following this on solutions. I think there's a lot of creative solutions that we can come up with. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists. We have about 30 minutes left in this panel, and I'd like to do a few things. First, we have a couple utility representatives standing by to answer questions. And I'm going to call on each of the three of you to discuss one or two of the main challenges that you see in implementing your customer-facing energy programs. Then I want to ask CPUC staff if there are any further questions you have for the panelists, and then we're going to move on to public comment. So I'm going to first move to the utilities. If you can keep it relatively short so we have enough time for public comment, that would be great, but I do want to hear from you. We have Meryl Wright. Would you like to start?
Hi, this is Meryl Wright from PG&E, Senior Director for our programs with ESA, Energy Efficiency, Clean Transportation, DR, DG. So a couple of thoughts. One is obviously, we have been trying as much as possible to support our customers, make sure that we can support our vendors, and putting in the policies in place as quickly as possible to do that. We definitely hear what was said today and have been working closely with vendors to make sure that we can make a difference here and keep the economy as much as possible moving. To respond to a couple items that were raised, we are focused as far as PG&E. It was mentioned as far as PG&E's more conservative approach. We did have a much more conservative approach at the start, and that conservative approach was based on making sure that we can best protect our customers and our employees with the proper PPE. We are loosening up that approach as far as field work goes. So we have started, and we will be starting disconnects and reconnects for solar. So we're moving in the more open approach during that. We want to make sure that obviously we move cautiously and continue to keep our customers protected and make sure that our field workers are protected in doing that. But we are moving towards a less conservative approach as we go forward. There are a few other items that were mentioned as far as we are looking to try to make sure we can get upfront. We have a financial assistance advice letter right now to be able to provide 50% upfront support on projects on the equity and resiliency. So going back to some things that were mentioned by Brad Hefner. And we want to make sure that we are looking for trying to put into more virtual inspections that we can put in place across our programs. So we want to try to make sure that we can modify our programs as much as possible for looking forward to the future, and working both with our contractors and the commission to do that. As was mentioned, PG&E has put in place the 60-day for the ESA contractors, the 60-day support through the loans, and we're continuing to working with those contractors. We're also making sure we can do calls, so virtual calls and virtual training for ESA in preparation so that once things open, we actually have a good pipeline on ESA as well as the San Juan Keying. So those are a few of the items that we've been put in place, and we're continuing to work with the commission, work with our vendors, and listen to the concerns of customers to make sure that our programs can meet those needs.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to hear from Jessica Lynn from Edison.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Jessica with Edison. I want to first just reiterate my thanks for being on this panel and participating in this important discussion. I want to also just reiterate that from an SCE standpoint, we are very much committed to supporting our workforce and our customers and our third-party partners during this really challenging time. We are working on adapting our programs so that we have as much flexibility as possible in serving our customers, and that includes adapting our programs to be flexible with virtual solutions. One of the areas that we're making sure that we emphasize is outbound communications with our customers to let them know about the bill relief solutions that we have that Ed Randolph mentioned at the beginning. So we are sending out text messages to about 3 million of our customers, and we're seeing a really great steady response rate in our weekly care enrollments because of that. We also understand that our non-residential customers have had a drop in their energy usage, which I'm assuming that means that they are really dealing with the challenges of staying in business. And so we have had an outbound call initiative where we're calling on customers, these business customers, to let them know about relief solutions that are being offered by the government as well. So in terms of challenges, you know, we are very much just working with our partners in having flexible solutions at this time. And I'll keep my comments short just so that we have time for public discussion. And just want to emphasize that we're here to help support this conversation and be a part of the solutions. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to ask CPUC staff if you have any questions for the panel.
Sarah, this is Randolph. I'll start off. I do note after I'm done, there may be a commissioner or two on, so we should give them an opportunity to ask questions if they want to. I wanted to get back a little bit with all of the panelists out there, just a little bit to understand, I mean, just a little bit more detail on if, you know, your members are able to get into homes to do work now. I know for Brad that some of his member companies have gotten it very clearly defined that they're essential services. Some of those folks are doing work around resiliency to help mitigate against the impacts of PSPS events. Sorry about that. And then I know on the flip side, the ESA contractors are right now on a strict prohibition on doing work from the utilities. But from the others, are you able to do any work at all right now? Is kind of one of the things I want to understand. So if we could go to the, besides Brad and Pat, the other folks, what's actually going on in the field?
This is Greg. Ed, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think much like what the ESA contractors are going through, many of my members are prohibited from doing efficiency project on-site work. That hasn't necessarily led to a complete stoppage of work efforts. So a lot of remote-based activities are happening in terms of reviewing project applications, going through a number of other activities. On the evaluation side, most of the evaluation work is continuing full steam, as you all know. So that's the perspective from the efficiency side.
Just briefly from Home Connect, we don't go in users' homes. They just order these smart plugs online. So it hasn't really affected us on that front.
Yeah, this is Abby with the San Joaquin Valley Pilots. So for the SJV Pilots, we are really at the beginning stages where the crucial role right now is to ensure that residents are being enrolled into these programs. So luckily, we are able to shift our operations where we are not going into homes the way we originally planned. And we are now working more virtually or remotely. So we've transitioned over to 100% phone operation where we are still completing applications, but they are on the phone, as well as utilizing email and mail. Just depending on how long the shelter in place lasts, for those community residents that are ready to move to the next phase, which is actual in-home assessments, that's when I think we'll start to see a potential pause if the project implementers are still not able to go into homes and conduct their assessments.
Yeah, and this is Alex Limmer. I can just add, for our employees, pretty much everyone was able to switch into working remotely. For the site visits, I think charging stations are a little bit different because they are generally outside, maybe in someone's garage, but it's very feasible to keep the physical distancing. So for the installations, that's something that we contract out, but we're ensuring that all the distancing protocols are being complied with and protections being used.
Okay. And then I'm going to save one thing for the solutions problem. I do want to talk a little bit about working with local building departments. And then maybe training around personal protective equipment out there. One other question I have right now, though, we didn't discuss it here, but I've had some conversations with some of the solar and storage companies over the last few weeks where they've raised underlying financial issues, big market issues, other things where the implication from some of them is, even if we can streamline issues in California, do other things like that, they probably have some underlying financial issues that are going to cause them to slow down work because of lack of access to the upfront capital they need to start a project. I'm curious to hear, mainly from Greg, but from Abigail and Pat and as well, and then directly if Matt and Alexander want to share about their companies, kind of what the overall financial outlook is for the various companies, separate of just what's going on in California.
So I think it's certainly a fair question that the efficiency industry has had some challenges in the last within the last few years, not necessarily because of the lack of interest and opportunity. I think a lot of what we're seeing is the underlying causes of some of the slowdowns in the industry and the financial challenges facing my members have more to do with the policies and some of the issues around how we look at cost effectiveness. I mentioned that in my opening remarks, that we need to look at seriously at how we regulate and how we oversee the resource, because what is underlying a lot of the challenges being faced by the industry have very much to do with how the policies have evolved and are not necessarily changing with the current economic times, even pre-COVID.
Anybody else want to add on to that? If not, that's the total of my questions.
I just wanted to emphasize again the fact that most of ESA contractor network are small businesses. And so as all small businesses are being impacted across the nation, we are being impacted as well. So there is, and with looking at what happens in the foreseeable future, working inside of customer homes, that is an area where we're all going to have to work really closely to figure out what is the solutions and make customers feel comfortable with letting contractors come back in and install weatherization measures, et cetera. So I think that there's still a fair amount of uncertainty and challenges with the ESA network.
I'll just weigh in. I think the lack of time frame alignment between what's happened over COVID-19, 6 weeks, things have totally changed on its head, and some of the kind of longer term requirements from the energy sector is really challenging. For example, just specifically, we're able to get users who put in smart plugs, they're able to get paid for energy payments right away, but those users will have to wait 18 months before they get paid for even having the plug on from a capacity or resource adequacy perspective. That seems kind of counterintuitive, given that a lot of these online type of programs, say for Netflix, for example, it would be crazy if someone wanted to sign up for Netflix and they couldn't get on for 18 months. And that's kind of one of the challenges of long timeframes from an energy policy perspective, trying to combat this 6-week time window of COVID-19.
This is Abigail. I think I'll just quickly add that, in the communities that we're serving in the San Joaquin Valley, as I mentioned earlier, there are residents that have been waiting for this to happen for quite some time. So we're not yet seeing the challenges of people, not wanting to move forward with the project. Although I was going to touch on this in the second panel, I think it's realistic to think that it would be a much slower process. But we also need to consider that some of these residents, not only are they anticipating the cost-saving measures that come with participation in the pilots, but many of them, have broken appliances that they're not using and can't afford to replace, and we're really holding off on having to replace that or using their own funds to do that and hoping that the pilot would cover. So, I think it's important to note that people are kind of in limbo waiting on what's next and hoping that they don't have to use money that they probably don't have.
And I can just add, kind of at a high level, looking at, financial issues. There's so many variables that are at play here that, we're really not sure how they're going to play out. But, I think for the broader EV charging market, we're going to really have to look. I mean, it's going to be directly tied in part to demand for EVs. And I think, if we're going into recession, thinking about how many people are buying new cars is probably going to be going down. So we're mindful of that, along with a whole host of other factors. But yeah, a lot of uncertainties that we're trying to track and just be conservative.
Okay, I'd like to move on to see if there are any questions from commissioners or commissioners' offices.
Good morning, everybody. Genevieve Sharoma. I couldn't see where to do the little hand things. I did the hand in the video there. Listen, thank you everyone for your very thoughtful presentations this morning. we're really gaining more insights, hearing about your experience. I have a question, one for the utility representatives on the line, and then a question for the folks who represent small businesses. Let me start with the small businesses first, and that is, could you amplify or share any further experience in successfully acquiring the small business loans from the federal government through that first stimulus package? I guess there's a second one on its way, but has anyone actually successfully garnered one of those small businesses loans?
This is Brad Hebner, Council. I can just tell you what I've heard from a lot of our companies. Lots of stories about companies getting through and having applications accepted, but no money flowing quite yet. So that's happening. But then also ones where they didn't meet the deadline for whatever reason. You know, the application was just slowed down. Who knows why? Didn't meet the deadline. So now they're kind of stuck and waiting and wondering. The other one is banks. They thought that they could go through their bank, and it ended up being that their bank was not in the program, or various problems like that, where the bank, as the middleman, didn't make the connection in time. So hearing a lot of that, there's a lot of hope for the next round.
Ditto, Brad.
Yeah, this is Greg. I'll just echo what Brad said. Many of my members are small businesses, and they are hopeful that they can take advantage of this opportunity with CARES.
And I will ditto the same thing. Some of the contractors have received approval, but no funds yet. Others did not get in the first round at all. They were in the first round, but the funds ran out before they were approved. So they're waiting on the second round.
Yeah, and Pat, thank you for your service on the Low Income Oversight Board. And at our last meeting, Pat brought up that when entities like the CPUC or the utilities, that we need to assure for that there is a good equity across the state of California, that it's not a matter of who can press the button first to get in the queue, but rather that there's a good set of criteria for evaluating applications and letting folks in the door. For the utilities on the line, my question is, we've heard about the this aspect of, are you an essential employee in the energy sector, or are you waiting for guidance on how to safely do the work? And so, for example, this is not an analogous example, but our local bakery in my neighborhood shut down, and then recently they started up again. It's like a restaurant type situation of people ordering online and their goods being brought out to the car, masks, all sorts of 6 feet distance and so forth and so on occurring. But there are very specific rules for folks who are handling food. And are the utilities waiting for that kind of guidance from the state of California for providing for a safe work environment for both the worker and for the household, the people in the household, in order to start up this kind of work? Because we know people are building houses in my neighborhood. Our mechanic is still working on people's cars. There are guidelines and requirements for all these folks. So for any who have any experience in terms of how do we safely get people back to work?
Hi, Commissioner Shroma. This is Erin Brooks from SoCal Gas. SoCal Gas has not, well, I want to clarify that there are different issues with the programs that we're offering versus the actual service that SoCal Gas is providing. So when it comes to the natural gas service, we have instated our own protocols. We are not waiting for the state of California to develop those for us. We have established protocols that are consistent with CDC recommendations as well as with coordination with local, regional, and state agencies. So we are enhancing our personal hygiene best management practices and increased facility sanitation at all of our facilities and job sites. We have social distancing guidelines in place, such as staging our workforce, limiting our company vehicle occupancy to 1 employee at a time, and spreading out staff to maintain a 6-foot distance between employees during the workday. We've also imposed all business travel restrictions and meeting restrictions through May 31st. We are requiring employees to stay home if they're sick and encouraging work from home where possible. But things about our in-home customer service provisions, our employees are wearing masks. We're adopting quarantine protocols for anyone who is tested positive or come into close contact. We are making sure that technicians are asking homeowners to move to another room, to maintaining that 6-foot distance. We really are trying to continue to provide service to all of our customers in this time. If another utility would like to weigh in on any other steps that they're taking.
Thanks, Erin. This is Meryl Wright again from PG&E. And just as a follow-up to what Erin said, PG&E opened our Emergency Operations Center in March. Out of that center, we created the MAC, or the policy group. And that policy group is not only looking at the guidelines from the governor, but really looking across the company to put in the policies in place. Again, as I mentioned earlier, to protect our customers, to protect our employees, and making sure that first and foremost, we can keep the lights on, that we continue with system hardening, and we continue the most important work that we can while continuing to support contractors and subcontractors at the same time, and making sure employees are safe. We, like what Erin had said, we're setting those policies. We're considering going back and revising them as necessary as things continue to evolve. And so it is something that's being worked on every day as we keep open our Emergency Operations Center and keep a focus on this.
This is Doug White from San Diego Gas and Electric. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Well, similar to what has been said previously by Meryl and Erin as well, from SoCal Gas perspective, we are adhering to all of the federal, state, and local mandates to stay at home or shelter in place, particularly when it comes to those activities that go into customers' homes. We really, the first and foremost application for us is to protect the healthcare, and the safety of all of our employees, customers, and contractors. So we do keep regularly in touch with the contractors, especially, for example, on the ESA, and told that they're wearing all the proper PPE. In terms of our own workforce impact, we have a significant population that's working from home, but being able to maintain all of those activities that we can virtually in order to maintain those service levels and get the customers the results that they need. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and really looking forward to hearing all the activities that people are involved in. This is a great listening opportunity for us to continue to dialogue and figure out how we can improve and also be of additional support.
And this is Jessica Lim with Southern California Edison. I echo what all the other IOUs have already shared, and I will just add that at SCE, we are also aligning with state, local, and CDC guidelines and keeping our employees, the public safety as our first priority. We did establish our Emergency Operations Center a while back. And in keeping with safety protocols, we're also balancing the need to keep our services working to serve our customers, proceeding with critical outages in terms of wildfire mitigation, and also balancing the needs of keeping critical projects going as well. So just wanted to add that short addition, and thank you for the question.
All right, thank you, everyone. I know we're approaching the 11 o'clock hour, but I thank you very much for your feedback.
This is Commissioner Randolph. I just wanted to ask really presented in the next panel, which is following up on something Pat said about as the restrictions are getting lifted, the contractors and customers' comfort level with people being in their home. And I'm just wondering, particularly for some of the smaller contractors, have they had any difficulty accessing PPE? And if so, would it be useful as the restrictions start getting lifted to try to provide some coordinated assistance in terms of contractors accessing PPE both for themselves and potentially to offer to residents as they're going into their homes, and then also training around the use of that equipment?
So I think we definitely look for guidance to working with the utilities on what that PPE equipment should be. I mean, does it need to include like booties and face masks and gloves and gowns or whatever? You know, it could be a lot of different things, but we really need some guidance, and we really appreciate the training that will be required as a result of that. As far as the supply chain is concerned, I think that it will get better in time, that there will be more available PPE gear. I have talked to some of my major suppliers that do have PPE gear in place, but it depends on what's really going to be required moving forward.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, commissioners, for your questions. Let me know if you have any others. Otherwise, we are at 11 o'clock, but it's really important for us to get to some public comments. So we wanted to take an additional 10 minutes to hear from the public. So please utilize that raise hand function. And we are also working on another solution to get more comments because we know we aren't going to get to everyone. So we will let you know what that is before the end of this webinar is over. Mary Claire, you can click on the panelist. Or
Hi guys, this is Mary Claire. So please toggle the raise hand next to your name if you'd like to make a comment. And I did get a note that people who are signing in using a web browser may not be able to use that function. So if that's the case, just enter a message that you have a question into the chat window and we'll call on you.
Hello. I'd like to make a comment. I don't know if I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to make a comment. Anna Solorio from CHOG, Community Housing Opportunities Corporation. I just want to thank Pat for representing the ESA contractors. We're a nonprofit. Our primary business is affordable housing. During the downturn, we became an ESA contractor. And I also want to thank Commissioner Shiroma and the CPUC staff, the Energy Division. We have kept all 62 of our ESA employees. We are paying them full benefits, full wages because of the advance that was provided to us through the IOU. So thank you very much for that. And the staff is very grateful. The issue I wanted to bring up was two. One is the difficulty of getting PPE because we are doing some work on our own properties. And the second is the loan we're very grateful for, but we're really concerned about the very, very short timeline that we're required to pay back the advance. And so if we had an ask, it would be to extend beyond, I think it's currently a year, beyond the year that because we don't know when we'll start work and we don't know how the reaction from our clients in terms of letting us in their homes to treat their home, weatherize their homes, we would like to ask for consideration to extend beyond. And why that's issues because the ESA, the current program will end at the end of the year. And I think the desire is to make sure all the money is paid back by that time, but we would ask for an extension. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can go to the next question. Kristen Tadonio. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't mean to raise my hand.
Okay. The next question is from Melisha Charles.
Hey all. Hi, it's Melissa Charles, Director of Public Policy from Sunrun. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Sunrun is a residential solar and storage company. We're one of the larger companies, and we're feeling all of the impacts that Brad talked through in his presentation. And this is an extremely challenging time. For the past year, Sunrun has placed a priority in increasing access to low-income renters in SOMA and increasing resiliency for low-income vulnerable customers in SJV. Both SJV and SOMA have lengthy payment cycles. And so for us, that means that we need to keep millions of dollars of cash on hand to enable participation in these programs. Keeping this much cash on hand while keeping sales and installation people employed is an incredibly difficult challenge in this environment. So one of our asks is to accelerate access to funding in SJV and SOMA. This will help us deal with this cash flow issue. And not having access to this cash flow basically puts these projects at risk and really impacts our participation in these programs. And to be clear, by accelerating incentives, I mean providing incentives upfront, as PG&E is proposing, which we're very grateful for. And we encourage the PUC to direct other IAs to do so in SJV, and for upfront cash and acceleration of incentives also to happen in the SOMA program as well. That's it for now. I just wanted to say thank you for putting this workshop together. It's very much needed. And thank you to Energy Division for the early outreach when this crisis really hit. It was really helpful to be able to convey our issues to the Energy Division and also to the Commissioner offices. So thank you very much.
Okay, the next question or comment is from Kelly Knutson. Kelly Knutson, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, here we go. Hey, this is Kelly Knutson from Bright Power. Thanks for that. Sorry, I hadn't unmuted myself. Again, thanks to everybody for this workshop. I want to echo what Mel just said from Sunrun. Similarly, we do retrofits for multifamily housing, both market rate and affordable housing, and we are working with a common area program within ESA in addition to the in-unit ESA program, the Energy Savings Assistance Program. And so if there was any extension into 2021 for the program funds, as well as construction deadlines, that would be helpful because we're hearing from a lot of the multifamily developers we're working with that those extensions would be very helpful. And we're also hearing concerns about cash flow in terms of rents coming in and other ways to be able to pay for some of these incentives or pay for some of the improvements, even if in many cases like the ESA CAM, the Common Area Measure Program, they actually are paid for up to 100% sometimes. And so any type of flexibility, great to hear what Mel just mentioned about upfront incentives for SOMA being considered and raised by PG&E. We're actively working with PG&E and TRC within PG&E territory about the ESA CAM program. So any construction financing, bridge loan, zero interest bridge loan, these types of efforts can be very helpful with the cash flow as we make our way through these projects. We've got more than just shovel-ready projects from the term from when we were in the last big economic crisis. Some of these projects were already underway and we just need to get going again, but cash flow would definitely help keep them moving forward. So thank you very much for that, and happy to chat more offline after the workshop.
All right, the next comment is from Jen No. Jen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much for hosting this panel. This has been really helpful. My name is Jin No with the California Energy Storage Alliance. And I just wanted to add an additional perspective where, we're seeing a lot of procurement and buying for behind-the-meter resources potentially to help deliver on some of the near-term resource adequacy needs as well. And so, I don't know how much of that need will be addressed by behind-the-meter resources, but I also wanted to add the perspective of potential, supply chain risks that COVID-19 could pose. To what I've heard so far anecdotally from our member companies, we haven't heard any constrained storage supply chains, for example, speaking just for the storage side. But anything that could potentially provide additional certainty and additional flexibility to have these resources be approved in a timely fashion would be a great way to mitigate some of the uncertainties of supply chains being constrained in the future. And I know some companies, and this might be case by case, some companies who have more diversified suppliers may be less at risk if there is a bottleneck from any of the manufacturers, but just to add that perspective as well, where we could also focus on how we should mitigate any risk on the supply chain side as well. Thank you.
All right, the next comment is from Elise Hunter.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. This is Elise Hunter. I'm California Policy Director for Grid Alternatives. Grid Alternatives is a nonprofit solar developer and installer and program administrator for low-income communities, and appreciate the opportunity to comment. Grid also supports finding a mechanism to provide upfront payments for incentive programs, particularly focused on the low-income incentive programs. And I won't echo the rationales that have already been stated, but definitely agree with those. I just wanted to emphasize that the low-income programs are especially important because, as Abigail had been outlining in her presentation, those households are most likely to face disproportionate financial impacts from the COVID crisis and are therefore very much in need of these energy bill and energy burden reducing services. So particularly in mind, we're hoping we can find solutions to the SJV equity programs, SOMA, and SASH and DAC-SASH. I'll mention that SASH and DAC-SASH are fundamentally different because Grid Alternatives, as the administrator, handles all of the funds and disperses them directly to projects. So there's a bit more of an accountability stream there, but we believe that for SOMA and for the SJV equity programs, which are more general market, that there would still be rich opportunities to pay incentives upfront and still maintain project integrity, as in making sure that the projects get built and that the benefits go directly to the recipients, and maintain protections in those programs. So very much support finding solutions to pay incentives earlier in the process to address cash flow problems that companies are facing. So thanks very much.
Great. And with that, we actually have no more raised hands and we're right on time, our new time at 11:10 to take a break. We're going to take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 11:20. I just want to thank everyone for your participation. I know everyone's eager to talk about solutions, and I look forward to that conversation next.
Hi, everybody. This is Mary Claire Brown. Welcome back to the workshop on the impacts of COVID on customer-oriented clean energy programs. Next up is our second panel, which is going to focus on brainstorming solutions. And I just wanted to remind folks, and for people who just joined, there'll be a panel discussion followed by an opportunity for public comment. Please keep yourself muted and only unmute yourself if you're called upon specifically by name by me. Ed, are you on the line?
I am here and ready. Do we have the panelists on the line? I will make the assumption that they're there. But I'm going to start off with a quick opening. So Laura, who's first, be aware that you're the first panelist, so I'm going to call on you in just a second. So again, thank you for the first panel for the information and the discussions there. That is extremely useful for us to hear what you've said there. As we move into this conversation on solutions, I do want to repeat something I said in the opening remarks to help focus us a little bit here. And keep in mind that as the PUC staff and as decision makers at the PUC look at the solutions to problems created by COVID-19, there are some limits on what we can do. One set of issues, as I'd mentioned before, is solutions that cost the IOUs money ultimately become ratepayer money. And that doesn't mean those aren't things that shouldn't be pursued, or it doesn't mean that in net there's not net ratepayer benefit. But we do need to be very conscious of those impacts going forward. The other issue is we need to be very focused on things that help as many people as we can help, and have to balance out something that helps maybe a few people versus things that will help a lot of people just from an overall bandwidth workload problem. And again, not that we can't pursue things that help one or two people or one-offs, but we need to look for the solutions that try to help everybody out there. And then finally, just once again, let no crisis go to waste is a very good mantra to always follow, especially in the clean energy, greenhouse gas reduction, environmental improvement space. But at the same time, we can't necessarily solve problems that have been litigated for years and years and years in the timeframes that we need to solve for some of these COVID-19 issues. So we do need to focus on the actual problems and solutions around COVID-19 and not the longer solutions. I'll note a couple issues that came up in the first panel that are out there that I'd like to discuss. So if panelists don't discuss them in their remarks, I'll probably circle back to them. One that was brought up is access to the personal protective equipment. As people start getting back in the homes, and ancillary to that is additional safety training for workers as they come back into as they start going back into people's homes out there. And there may be a need to ramp up access to both of those. Another issue that did come up is potentials on upfront funding. Would like to explore that a little bit. I don't think the PUC's in the position to do large-scale forgivable loans or issues like that, but we're definitely in a position to explore some upfront funding to create better financial flows for companies. Another issue that was indirectly brought up, it might have actually just been brought up in some of the comments on the side, are in-home inspections by the utilities. Utilities are trying to solve some of these problems now so they can get back in the field and do the in-home inspections. But are there other solutions to those problems that we can be pursuing as well? And then finally, one in there that was brought up at the very end is the need to maybe focus a little bit more on programs that help low-income customers and customers that were disproportionately negatively impacted by this crisis. So with that, Laura Edson, are you on, and can you start off, please?
Can you hear me now?
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Edson. I am the lead for energy efficiency and workforce matters across the country at NRDC. For those of you who might not be familiar with NRDC, we're an international environmental nonprofit, and we focus on a wide range of issues related to the environment, health, and community. We greatly appreciate this opportunity, Ed. Thank you for the opening. I hope this is one of many conversations to get us at the most effective solutions to help both customers and workers, and do so in a way that is most cost efficient. My comments here will focus a bit broader in terms of the overarching challenges that we've all talked about thus far, including items that are happening now, but also in the mid and the longer term. And how can we collectively systematically solve for these issues that have been raised? And while I use energy efficiency as some of the examples that are coming, a lot of these items can be applied across all of our clean energy efforts. So looking across the country, we've been seeing a lot of activity happening in the East in particular, some in the Midwest. New York and Connecticut have given us some ideas of how we could go about doing what is being asked today, which is a great momentum. We encourage the CPUC to include at minimum a few of some common themes that have come up, some that we have discussed. In particular, workforce matters, and I'm speaking not only of the immediate, but what do we do long term? Goals, what do we do with our goals given everything is different for energy savings now, program design, and cost recovery, which is much broader than just energy efficiency. In each category, there are a number of questions that need to be answered. I will give only a few examples to illustrate, but my working list is much longer, and I'd be happy to work with anyone who's interested in fleshing that out. For example, for workforce, some items to address would include, how do we support workers in the near term who are struggling in addition to the ESA contractors? I think that the Commission did a great job responding quickly to that, but there are a number of other workers that are in similar situations, and what do we do about that in the short term? Is there any way to be creative around work items, meaning can workers be shifted in the short term and maybe even in the midterm so that the payments aren't just a loan? I heard that there is a lot of, the prepayments have a lot of issues for some folks to repay. Is there a way instead to shift the workflow so that it's actually paying for work that's being done now? And then what does the transition back to work look like? We talked a bit about this in terms of PPE, but what else is going on? What else do we have to consider? And I think it would be a great opportunity to think and do some outside surveys to understand what customers are going to be comfortable with and how workers are going to feel comfortable. Even with PPEs, are they going to feel uncomfortable? How do we solve for those issues in the transition back? In terms of goals, big question about energy saving goals. What do we do about 2020 and 2021? And what do we do about future energy saving goals, given that we don't have the data of the assumptions of uptake? We should be thinking ahead of the curve to figure out how we're going to do that when we get back to our normal processes. There's also a number of unknowns around program design. Assuming that people have less of an appetite for programs after COVID, I'm assuming that's going to be the case, that it's not going to be the same. We're not going to go back to exactly what normal, quote unquote, is. There's going to be a new reality. So what is it that we need to do now to think ahead of time, to get ready, not only to serve customers now, but to transition into a way that can be helpful for uptake later? So do we have the right information to inform program design? Are there opportunities to adjust or to rely more on pilots to help some programs that can be more timely and responsive? What are the things that we need to do now to get us ready for then? And the last thing around cost recovery, which is broader than energy efficiency, there is a very real need to manage how utilities are going to recover their costs during this time of lower energy use and moratoriums on shutoffs, which we strongly support should continue. What are our options to preserve our clean energy commitments while protecting customers? Could we use unspent funds in certain situations? Is there access to some of the stimulus funds that could support?
what you said about the customers are ultimately the one that are going to pay for anything that we do. So we really need to think holistically about how we're going to serve them and make the utilities whole so that we can continue our efforts. So in conclusion, working on these and other items as soon as possible will help us get ahead of potential issues. And we're hoping that we can do a highly coordinated effort, that sometimes we need some targeted discussions, as there are some differences in these different clean energy efforts, but there are also a lot that is similar. So however we can do that, we think the objectives of any process should be sure to have coordination across everything that is relevant. That will also help us learn from the ideas that come from other sectors so that we could potentially bundle or at least learn from those other ideas. And then we can also ensure in that way that the decisions and the direction that comes is going to be consistent for everyone. Perhaps it could be done in this informal manner, which will be quicker than a proceeding, but if we need a formal decision, that is a barrier, so we need to think through that. And then regardless of however you do it, having sufficient opportunities for parties, stakeholders, whomever to participate and to provide feedback is going to be really imperative. There are also interesting ways to get feedback. So we were talking about potentially doing pre or post online surveys. And then the Energy Division did a really interesting thing at the last third-party solicitation process, where they used Slido to get a number of comments that we would have not otherwise received. That's another opportunity or a similar effort. In closing, this is an unprecedented time, and we need to be thinking about how we manage all of these issues in a very intentional manner so that we can ensure that the workforce is there when we emerge from this crisis, and that programs are designed and funded in an appropriate way for wherever we are post-pandemic. This funding and infrastructure is going to be critical to provide relief to Californians and get us back moving in the economy. We're happy to work with whomever is interested in thinking through a strategy, either through these processes or as cohorts to inform these processes. And we think that we have a really unique opportunity here to envision what efficiency and our general clean energy strategy could look like in light of our new reality. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide my comments.
Thank you, Laura. That's very helpful. I think next we have Brad Hebner again from CalCEA.
Yeah, CalCEA. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, Brad, I'm never going to change my, yeah, it's still Pac-Bell Park to me, so you guys will remain CalCEA.
Got it. Okay. So we had some slides for this, but I don't think it's necessary to show them at all. Mary Claire, let us know if they'll be available for download from the PUC website, or if people should just contact me if they want to see the copy of those slides. Yeah, on the solution side, I think of 3 levels of response that are needed. One is on just allowing installers to work. Let's get up. Here we go. Allowing installers to do their work, allowing customers to make investments, sort of clearing the way for the business activity to happen. That's number 1. Number 2 would be short-term fixes that need to happen within programs because it's impossible or very difficult to meet program requirements due to COVID problems. That's a second category of response that's needed. And the third category is encouraging local energy as economic stimulus. A lot of this stuff is very shovel-ready. You know, in the solar perspective, the residential side, jobs can be put up real quickly. Even the commercial side, it takes more planning. It's still way more shovel-ready than most infrastructure investments, projects. And so, yeah, we're ready. It is real economic stimulus. And we saw this last time around in the 2008 recession. I know a bunch of solar company leaders who were general contractors before that downturn. And then it was a point where policy was pushing the growth in the solar market. So they just said, hey, I can't do construction right now. I'm going to start a solar company. And it was economic development. It was a real boost to the economy. And the same thing can happen here where projects are ready to go. And I really think we need to have that mentality. So number 1, in allowing market activity, there are 2 things in particular, above all, one more than others, and Merrill Wright at PG&E, I mentioned this earlier, but I in my 6 years at CALSA, have never heard so many people complain about one single thing than right now, that PG&E is not performing disconnects. We need to get PG&E out to the job site for half of residential jobs, all storage jobs, all commercial jobs to do a disconnect, to do the work. And they have categorically shut that down. And I understand that they now have a plan for bringing that back, but from our perspective, it should happen today. And so, you know, that's really stopping us in our tracks on a lot of jobs and you know, prolonging the problems. That's number one. Also, guidance that this is essential work. I mean, there is good stuff coming out of the governor's office saying that all energy is essential work. Outside of the Bay Area counties, a lot of business activity is happening, except in various jurisdictions. Within the Bay Area counties, we're in direct contact with them about that. But a clearer statewide guidance about construction would be helpful. Okay, that's that sort of clear the way category things. And then there are program rules that need to be adjusted in the short term. For demand response providers, if you do a demand response call, you have to realize that it might be hard, it might underperform because a lot of customers don't have load to shed. So just recognize that and don't penalize customers that are trying to do it, but it's just not there. In SJP, the cycling requirement in order to get PBI payments is the problem when there's nowhere to put the power. You don't want to discharge the battery if the customer's not using the power, and there might be non-export systems. So that's something that really needs to be looked at. And then the construction deadlines within SJP and other programs, Prop 39, a big one where, you know, through no fault of our own, projects were going to meet the deadlines and now they're not. And so I think it should be announced that those will, you know, kind of a blanket announcement that there'll be flexibility there would go a long way. CSI thermal termination date is a problem with you know, projects just not going forward because customers are not working on them. And so extending that would be extremely useful. Okay, that's the second category. I think there are more that will just have to come through program by program and nitpicky little niche things that need to be addressed. And then there's the third category of things, which is economic stimulus. And I think this is very real. Number one, we've heard about accelerating incentive payments, and you know, the problems of cash flow right now are real. And this is a category where the money's been allocated. In the case of SJP, it is ratepayer money. It's already been allocated. It's going to get paid. So paying it a little earlier in the process will be super helpful. What PG&E proposed is great. The other utilities can do the same, paying half closer to upfront once certain milestones are hit. On the residential side, we have one of the CCAs paying it all up front as long as you have a strong application, knowing that it's going to get paid. We should look at that. In the case of SOMA, it's not even ratepayer money. This is cap and trade money, and currently it's all paid at PTO. So if we do a third of it at one milestone, another third, another milestone, another third payment when the project's totally complete, that would have a tremendous benefit on cash flow and the ability for companies to keep operating and doing these projects. The low-income, you know, multifamily buildings we're talking about. So I think that one is a clear winner, and it's just a matter of mechanics of making it happen. On SJP, there's some streamlining of rules that would help a lot, and two in particular that have been talked about. There's some that have been implemented, and you know, thanks go out to the PAs for being collaborative on that, but there's some big ones that really haven't been put in place. One of them is virtual inspections. They promised to do this back in 2018. We still haven't seen it, which frankly I think is shameful. It shouldn't take a year and a half to implement something like that, and it would make a huge, huge difference. And the other one, we're currently experiencing a problem with the SJP database, and we really need to get a war room mentality to fixing those problems, which I don't see. It's just so slow and methodic, and I understand, and we're all supportive of due diligence, but there's a point where it's counterproductive to the goals of the program. So there are various upgrades, in addition to fixing the database, upgrades that have been promised to the database to make it easier to use the application portal, and it just hasn't happened, despite months and months and months. So accelerating that will be huge. And then other things that involve spending money and just helping customers. One thing happening over in the microgrid proceeding, the utilities have proposed, at the Commission's urging, to help municipal customers hold their hands through interconnection process. We love this. We think that would be great. It's very needed. And then a parallel to that is getting some consultants to help with system design, to hold the customer's hand, help them out, to deal with vendors, and that would cost money to pay those consultants, but not a ton of money, and it would be super helpful to getting those microgrid projects happening. And then in the longer term, in terms of actually paying some of the costs for low-income schools to do solar plus storage, for example, we have some ideas of how to do that that won't have an impact on the state budget in the near term, but we can get the resilience right away. And so we'd like to further pursue that using bond authority to make activity happen now that can be paid for later, and critical resilience for schools and other critical customers. So I'll stop there. Plenty more ideas, but we'll have to cut off there.
Brad, thank you very much for that, and congratulations. That was an incredibly helpful list and specific list you gave there, so thank you. And I was taking notes all the way through that, so my other computer locked up on me while I was doing that, so I don't know who the next panelist is. Mary Claire, who was that, or?
Abigail?
It's Abigail Solis.
Okay, Abigail, if you can start, please. Thank you.
Sure, and Marie Claire, not sure if you could put up my last two slides as I speak.
Yes, hold on.
Okay, great.
It's the right slide? Okay.
With the one before that. Thank you. Okay, so thank you again for the opportunity. I'm Abigail Solis, for those that didn't hear me introduce myself earlier. I'm with Self-Help Enterprises. We are a nonprofit organization in the Central Valley working on the San Joaquin Valley pilots. So, I think there are different levels of opportunities for new strategies throughout this, unforeseen crisis, and I think it depends on the role that you are trying to complete when you consider what options are available. For example, when it comes to enrollment onto energy programs, which is at the stage that we're at right now, there are opportunities to try something different. Earlier, I talked about how we usually rely on door-to-door, in-person community meetings, because for disadvantaged communities, those are strategies that we've used for years, and we know that they work. However, there is an opportunity to shift when your job is to enroll, right? So we have switched our operation over to using technology, using laptops and phones, and completing applications over the phone, also emailing back and forth to collect information from customers, as well as using regular mail, to mail out application packets and work with the customer on the phone to fill it out. And also utilizing the opportunity of websites and social media outlets, to relay information to communities. All of these things are great opportunities to still get the work done and move forward with certain tasks. Next slide. However, I do want to talk about the fact that sometimes we don't consider that these new virtual options are not always a reality for the customers that we're trying to serve. In San Joaquin Valley, many of the pilot communities are in rural areas, and they have very limited access to Wi-Fi. Sometimes even if they can't afford to pay the high cost, the access is just very bad, and most people choose not to use it because they're paying over $100 a month for a very bad Wi-Fi connection. So sometimes connectivity is a real barrier, and even as the the PI, and if we're willing to put these strategies in place, we are limited to what we can expect residents to be able to do if they have limited access to internet, as well as not having experience utilizing this technology. I think a lot of customers are open to trying new things, but they don't have the same amount of experience as we do using smartphones and apps and other technology that we are now relying heavily on. This takes a time for education and bringing them up to speed, making sure that they are comfortable using these new technologies. And I think that we have to, account for the time, right, that it takes to do that. And also, when dealing with customers as well as even our workforce, we do have to consider, like I mentioned earlier, the competing priorities. When families are worried about economic impacts, lower income, figuring out how they're going to provide food and shelter for their family, it could be that getting this application done for this energy program is not exactly the priority task for them right now, right? So as much as they want to do it, there could be other things that come before this. So I say this because, when you're, if you're an IOU and you have, a contractor whose job is to reach residents, we need to understand that it may take a little more effort than usual, right? Because we can't just go knock on their door. So I think it's important to maintain regular communication with customers however we can, whether that's phone calls, emails, social media. That will definitely help customers who are feeling anxious if we are able to provide them with regular updates. And overall, I think we, as much as we put these solutions in place or attempt to, I think we have to be realistic and accept that this may be a slower process than we originally thought. And I do want to point out one real thing that I didn't have in my slides originally, is that there's a real difference between the way large IOUs operate and small businesses and nonprofit CBOs, right? We as CBOs are helping communities deal with many other issues, not just this specific program. We're helping them with housing. We're helping them with the other things that they're dealing with. And because of that, I think we take those things into consideration. And I think it's important for larger IOUs to understand all of the other things that come with the role of being a small business and a nonprofit organization. But overall, I'm very optimistic that for the SJV pilots, we do have a plan in place to move forward with enrollment process. However, I'm open to considering solutions for the next step, which is assessment. I've heard a lot of talk about virtual assessments. I think it's a great opportunity, again, if the Wi-Fi access is available for those residents. Thank you.
Abigail, thank you for that. I'm just going to tee up a question I'm going to ask when we get to the question areas that I probably going to have a few questions around the kind of the virtual outreach. I'll note that this has been an issue in a number of areas, and care marketing and outreach in other places, where especially the community-based organizations outreach models have changed and they're shifting to other things. I'm curious to know if there's already been developing some best practices or how we can develop best practices around that. But just teeing that up for a question later on. So next we have Abdullah, I think is next. Is that right? Oh, no, I'm behind. Ted Coe from STEM is next.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Great. Again, I'm going to echo what other panelists have said about thanks for inviting me to speak on this panel. My name is Ted Coe. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for STEM. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, STEM is the largest developer and operator of behind-the-meter energy storage systems in the non-residential space. So anything from schools and government buildings to commercial and large industrial buildings. And we are the largest installer and operator for behind-the-meter storage in the SJV program in California, again, in the commercial space. And more importantly to this particular topic is we're probably also the largest operator of this storage for demand response and the demand response programs in the state. And so while we share all the issues and impacts of COVID on the installation side, of installing, and getting these projects installed and operating for the customers, there's an entire another class of issues that with COVID that we are one of the ones best suited to talk to, which is the performance in the programs, like the DR programs and the SJV program, and the rules around that. And so we didn't talk about that as much in the first panel. So I wanted to, and Brad mentioned it a little bit in his opening remarks here, but I did want to talk about that specifically as my kind of added addition to this discussion is the issues around the rules about how you satisfy your, for example, DR commitments, or you satisfy your SJV commitments with the systems that are operating today are also being impacted by COVID. And it's important that we address those also and give relief to those issues at the same, like also today, so that going forward, when we come out of this crisis, that that these solution providers like STEM and other people who are doing the same thing are able to continue to provide these solutions, these cost-saving solutions for ratepayers going forward. So it's useful to really categorize these issues in kind of four major categories. The first one being delayed enrollments because of COVID, so delayed enrollments of customers in those programs. The second one is delayed construction and deployment, like the things we talked about earlier, not just in getting that system installed for the customer, but what it means in terms of getting that capacity into the programs, the commitments that you're making in, like, for example, DRAM or other kinds of DR programs or LCR contracts. The third category is temporary load impact, as what we talked about a little bit earlier, and what Matt talked about a little bit earlier also is customers are just shut down, so they just don't have the load. What does that mean for these programs where you're supposed to be shedding load? And then the fourth one is permanent load impact, and where we see the possibility, it hasn't happened yet, but we see the possibility that customers just go out of business. It's not something that you're going to see necessarily happen in the residential space, but in the commercial space, if the COVID impact actually puts them out of business, then that site might permanently have no load going forward. And so what do you do with the energy storage system or the DR or whatever technology you've installed or enrolled for that customer? So under those four categories, and I can go through a really fast list and then we can discuss it overall. But for the first couple categories of delayed enrollments or delayed constructions, the key thing that you need to do for the DR type programs or commitments is to give either a relief or a pause or exemption on the DR commitments and the penalties that the DR providers might have to pay if they can't actually shed the load that they're when called upon. So even though, like, during this time of low load, it's less likely we're going to get a DR call from either the utility or from the wholesale market, it's still possible. And if that happens within the context of the wholesale market, peak pricing, or within stuff like our local capacity contracts with Edison and other utilities, the DR providers need to have some relief or some exemption from their commitment. And similarly, we can get into some smaller details about these programs, but things like these DR programs also have like testing requirements. Like there's a scheduled in DRAM, there's a scheduled test in August to see whether you have the capacity that you say you're committed to. And if we're still in this situation in August with the load, we're not going to be able to do that. So like waiving requirements during this period would be another one of those things that we should do right away. The other things that Brad talked about a little bit with the SJV program, again, load impact, like delayed enrollments, delayed construction should mean that, and temporary load impacts mean we can't do the PPI cycling in SJV and those kinds of requirements for SJV, as well as thinking about like the GHG cycling rules also, as to whereas like whether we need to whether we're still able to meet the new GHG requirements at SJV. Those are also an open question about whether it's possible even in this time if we can't actually cycle the batteries. And then finally, I think the last part of that is the permanent load impact type issues where a customer just goes away permanently. All the programs, both the DR programs and the SJV programs, need to be able to allow us to transfer those systems and move those installations to another customer, to another site, and without reapplying to the program, without reapplying for the incentive, and all going through all that process again, but just transfer all the requirements over to a new customer site for that. And so that's my, again, really quick list of things that we've identified right now as immediate things that are really within the purview of the commission to address right away. And we can talk about, and I'm happy to talk about the other things around going forward, future changes in the program, and things like accelerating the SJV incentives to get more deployments. As we're seeing, like, for example, the May 12th, we're going to expect that when the SJV equity budget opens on May 12th, there's going to be quite a surge in applications in that thing, and it's important that we put as much of this streamlining things in place as possible so that those equity and equity resilience projects that'll be applied on May 12th can get installed as fast as possible. That's it for me.
Thanks, Ted. One quick question for you before I move on. You listed just kind of a number of what I will broadly categorize as performance rules or metrics that you're suggesting may need to be waived. I just want to clarify. I assume what you're suggesting there is those be waived in for a temporary basis, not long-term changes to those rules, at least for the purpose of this conversation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, during the period of this crisis until the time we decide when load has come back. Yeah, I think it's
I know some of those rules people are advocating that they be changed in the long term, but that's a different conversation. Okay. Next is Abdella.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Edward, and also Marie-Claire and Sarah for inviting me. My name is Abdella Sherkawi. I am the chair or president of the Electric Vehicle Charging Association. I'm also senior vice president of government, automotive and utilities at Volta Charging, San Francisco-based company that provides electric vehicle charging infrastructure, builds and maintains. This has been an interesting, I guess, forced experiment on reducing a needed commute. So to your words, Edward, on we should not let any crisis go to waste. I think there would be some benefits. And I'm echoing Alex Lummer, my good friend from ChargePoint, on the impact of actually the shelter at home on air quality. So what's really interesting, I'm not going to go back to the challenges, but perhaps like a couple of really quick solutions I've outlined, really looking from the electrification of transport across the various companies that are represented by the Electric Vehicle Charging Association. I think one of the things is like the shelter at home orders were mentioning fueling services as essential services, yet it was very unclear that electric vehicle charging is one of those. Something interesting, Volta essentially deploys mostly public electric vehicle charging. I think companies like ChargePoint, EV Connect, EV Go, and others probably see the same thing along the different use cases or places in the public where it is deployed, and actually probably as well as private in this case. But we have seen a huge difference. Essentially, we've been looking at the utilization and the fueling distancing between grocery stores and drug stores versus shopping malls or stadiums and movie theaters, and the difference was quite abrupt. But the utilization at grocery stores and drug stores actually remained high. In fact, in some cases, even increased. And there are two pieces to this. The categorization of essential services for the electrification of transport in this case is something that could be really helpful. In terms of the impact that we've seen, and I think it's been mentioned across solar installations or storage installations, we have seen a little bit of the same thing, and which is we like as a bunch of companies that are actually California based, really, we have a lot, I mean, we have hundreds, if not thousands of shovel-ready projects that came to a halt, partly due to permitting. And some of that actually was even a problem before. In fact, in 2015, Assemblymember Chu, spearheaded AB 1236, which essentially directs all local governments to streamline. And it has been very similar to what was done in solar. And we currently have a bill that is spearheaded by Assemblymember McCarthy and Chu and Reyes, AB 2168, which would be great to just push the permitting part, because I mean everything has slowed to a pause for obvious reasons. Yet, if we want to come out of this swinging, it would be fantastic. A lot of the financing has been sucked out of the room, because obviously the majority should go. It's the right thing to do to putting people back to work and essentially helping families in need, and then really resiliency programs. We still have potential to actually help going back to work quicker. So both of those things can work in synergies. So I'm pointing this one. Electrification of transport, there is no question about it, is something that's very capital intensive. And one part of it, and we've seen this from the initial IOU pilot programs, that working with site hosts, especially in the public space, whether it's in disadvantaged communities or in actually communities that have seen a lot of electric vehicle adoption already, there is definitely a difficulty working with site hosts to convince them. And now it's getting even more difficult as they are themselves. And if we think about shopping malls and all the variety of, site hosts that are going to have their own problem, how do we help to keep the momentum, or to restart, as I mentioned, swinging at it as quickly as possible, because it actually represents construction jobs. And it also still, we still have the objective of, reducing air quality and energy efficiency, and having essentially systems that can contribute to demand response and vehicle to grid, essentially, ancillary benefits. So those would be my, my few points, to target for the PUC that I think could be helpful. And finally, maybe on a good note, I'd like to say, and again to your point, Edward, on no crisis go to waste. Volta has an interesting model where we're essentially using advertisement to monetize EV infrastructure and maintain it. Creates a huge load. We have high utilization, a very interesting model. We actually use this as a messaging system, and we responded very quickly in terms of messaging the community, in essential places such as drugstores and grocery stores. We call it now the Essential Service Network. And we had an amazing response from a lot of cities. And in fact, we're going to announce this in a couple of days, that we're now working with first responders. So we can essentially double up on what is critical infrastructure, what is having ancillary services to the grid. That's also has potential and positive services to the community at large, and working with all local municipalities on this.
Okay, thank you very much. And then last on the panel, we've got Michael Campbell from the Public Advocate's Office.
Thank you, Ed. My name is Mike Campbell, Program Manager for Electricity Pricing and Customer Programs with the Public Advocate's Office. I definitely want to start by thanking you and the commissioners for putting together a public process to start getting stakeholder involvement, and as well as just taking a moment to pause and recognize the contributions that all the panelists are making, their workers are making, as well as the significant suffering of their workforces, as well as workforces everywhere. You know, Brad provided some interesting statistics about the effects in his industry. And I was just looking before this call, you know, the Bureau of Labor provides, the Department of Labor provides the metrics on job losses, and already, you know, the continued claims metric at the height of the Great Recession, the United States, that metric was at 6.6 million jobs. And this week we far surpassed that. We're at 16 million. So we're seeing challenges everywhere. And Ed, I think you took a little bit of my thunder in terms of hitting some of the key themes that I wanted to touch base on, which had to do with equity in the economy, as well as just where we were already very concerned where rates were going to go before the COVID-19 pandemic for next year. And so it's just a real clear to us that as we move forward, we need to be thinking carefully about how what we do, and we're looking at all the various solutions on the table, how those really provide ratepayer value, help make sure that we're promoting the important societal goals that everybody here cares so much about. But the future is uncertain, and we want to make sure we don't create any headwinds for businesses or households as we start to come out of what looks to be a very significant recession. You know, you can read different economists' views on whether it's going to be V-shaped or protracted. But it's very likely that we want to try to be doing something to help make sure that the most money is in customers' pockets as we can. Which is part of why Cal Advocates promoted and supported the kinds of things that the Commission has already done in terms of providing direct supports to rates in the near term. Some of the things that Laura mentioned, I think, are useful in terms of, you know, one, having a stakeholder process. I'm hopeful that we'll have more of these and be able to look forward to having further chats as we talk about specific solutions. You know, and as we start looking at solutions, one of the key things is we need to start understanding the specific issues that the clean energy industry is facing. So what activities are being affected by the COVID? You know, we've heard some interesting points regarding credit and cash flow, and some of the ways of trying to make sure that's available, using some of the access to credit that the utilities may have. But also what issues are facing that we have limited levers on here through Commission policies in terms of consumer demand, and how to make sure that workforces are operating and being able to work safely, especially when we have in-person limitations, in-person contact. Sorry, my notes, the conversation this morning was so good, my notes are all over my not particularly good home office desk here. Another item that Laura raised is something that we've been thinking about, and I just was, you know, in terms of repurposing workforces, since we're expecting, I think it's reasonable to expect we're going to have a lot more people needing to take advantage of the programs we have to help people like CARE and FARA. Maybe there are opportunities to have some workforce be repurposed to helping with that outreach, helping customers take advantage of those things, and that type of thing. Regarding the use of unspent funds, obviously that's something we're always very interested in, and we're just going to have to, as we have these conversations going forward, take into account how any type of spending or the use of unspent funds, how applying that to maybe help the summer bills this year is to, you know, customers' advantage, or offsetting what costs we may have coming next year to reduce rate shocks for next year. So we're really thinking that this conversation is hopefully first of many, and having careful prioritization, examining all proposals that are out there. We're in a place where it's probably pretty challenging to be thinking that we're in an all of the above kind of strategy of every method of trying to promote our important policy goals. We do have some that probably have greater impact than others. And I just would mention one element is, unfortunately, this COVID-19 pandemic is really, it's really demonstrating the fractures in our society between the people that have some economic resources and those that don't. It's obviously hitting those that don't a lot harder. And so things that are structural that may be having some of those transfers, such as things like NEM, where there's some challenges with just the revenue shortfalls because of reduced sales. The SDG&E's low-income customers spend approximately 15 to 20% of their bill to support NEM. I know the Commission is looking forward to looking at NEM policies going forward. See Ed smiling there. So there's a few number of things we need to tackle. I think, Ed, you raised a really good point up front about how can we try to be nimble and deal with the COVID-19 while also addressing long-term policy challenges that various parties have raised and litigated. And with that in mind, I would just say that we would be wanting to make sure that we're not taking policy approaches that reduce ratepayer value. But I think there were a lot of really good recommendations and thoughts presented on these panels that we should consider, and ways that we can leverage some of the access to things that the utilities may have access to that smaller businesses don't, in a way that doesn't create, like I was saying, additional headwinds that would be disadvantageous. With that, I'll conclude my remarks.
Thank you very much, Michael. We have a couple minutes left in the allotted time for the original presentations. I'm not going to call on each one of you individually, but we do have representatives from the utilities and GoBiz here, largely to answer questions if they come up. But if any of you want to respond or add on to what has already been said, now is the opportunity, so please do.
This is Meryl Wright again from PG&E. I wanted to appreciate all the ideas and focus the fact that we want to continue to partner and brainstorm on this and be able to implement some of these ideas as quickly as possible. Now's the time more than ever that we need to work together to make this happen. So we're dedicated in doing that. I wanted to follow up on a couple quick items. Laura mentioned the training and the PPE support for contractors and subcontractors. We completely agree with that and recognize the need to provide additional training, especially as employees change and maybe possibly even some of our subcontractors change and coming out of this, and making sure that those contractors and subcontractors have the appropriate training and PPE available and the protocols as we move forward. A couple other items. One is we also back the virtual inspections. We're in the process of modifying some of those protocols, working with the Commission on that. And so we want to make sure that we can implement virtual inspections as soon as possible. Another point I wanted to raise was the on-bill financing for PG&E. We've recently raised and implemented an advice letter to put a holiday on all payments for 6 months for on-bill financing if those customers choose to take that on, that they want that holiday of payments. And then there were a few regulatory and policy items raised that I think we can work together on. Reassessing the 2021 goals was raised. Extending the ESA cycle is another option of possibly that may simplify the contractor terms for repayment. Another point that has been raised on chat was relaxing the income verification for ESA. And so those are things that we can continue to talk about. And then lastly, there was a few items that raised on the demand response side. And we want to make sure, one thing we've been doing is making sure that there's more flexibility in the demand response as we go forward, waiving some of the testing requirements, working with some of the vendors and making sure we extend the nomination windows there. So we look forward in all as far as doing more than we have been already and helping trying to implement some of these ideas. So we appreciate the collaboration and would like to move forward with that. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. This is Jessica Lim with Southern California Edison. I just wanted to add on to Meryl's comments that at SCE, we're also very supportive of collaborating on solutions. We're currently focused on looking at flexibility and program requirements, such as many of the ideas that have already been shared. So we are definitely focused in those specific areas. I did want to comment quickly on a request to start looking at best practices for virtual outreach. And so in terms of agile and innovative solutions, I wanted to share that we are focused on e-learning solutions and promoting our e-learning classes. And in just this quarter alone, we've seen an increase of over 5,000 participants in our classes, and then compared to Q1 of last year, we saw over 3,000. So definitely a jump in that area. And then lastly, in terms of virtual outreach, we're focused on trying to fill our pipeline for our programs. So I wanted to just focus on our marketplace that we have on sc.com. We also have energy efficiency on that marketplace, and more recently we've added solar since January, and as of today we've added battery storage to that. So we've had over 5,000 visits on our DER marketplace, and we had about 13 sales go through that process. I realize it's a small number, but I'm very enthusiastic about the start of this new way of doing business with customers. So I want to share with everyone those quick updates. Thank you.
Hi, and this is Erin Brooks from SoCalGas. Just a couple of points to add. Ed, you'd asked a question earlier about best practices on shifting traditional marketing and outreach, because most of our events for our care outreach and our ESA was in-person community events that have been happening all over our territory. So we've done a lot. Of course, those are all paused. We've shifted our outreach mostly to social media channels and traditional marketing channels. We launched a very large campaign on April 6th to promote the care program to our customers, including those who have recently had their income change because of new unemployment or less employment opportunity. And then the last thing I will add is I wanted it to be a little bit clear that for our general energy efficiency portfolio, our entire portfolio has not stopped serving our customers and has not stalled because of COVID-19. There's still a lot of activities that are happening and able to continue. For example, our rebate programs are still in full force. We've actually seen a small uptick in our rebate applications in the month of March and trending upwards in April. And we're also continuing things like our behavioral programs, our home energy reports, things that can be done virtually, but do also make an impact and continue to serve our customers and their efficiency needs.
This is Doug from SUG&E. Certainly wanted to follow on with that and Ed address a couple of the items that you'd raised initially about virtual outreach. We are continuing to work with our 10 prime contractors we have with on the ESA side, in addition to our community outreach through all digital platforms, social media, et cetera. In terms of care enrollment, it's reached full steam. So it's been really helpful to making sure that people who are in the need are getting it. And Mike had a point earlier about not increasing headwinds for folks once the recovery efforts are happening. And so the conversation around loosening any kind of controls around upfront incentives, we just want to be really careful with that to make sure that the proper protocols are there and protections are in place to make sure that the ratepayer funds, which are ultimately on the line here, we're all being good stewards of.
Okay. We move on to question and answer period. I don't have specific questions, but I at least not for today. I do have some kind of more general requests out there. But to sum up a little bit, kind of general trends I've heard from this panel. And by the way, congratulations to everybody for very clear, succinct presentations in the list. I thought there's no way we would get through this many witnesses in this time period. So that was very good. But no particular order. I saw some themes kind of resonate through everybody's presentation with some individual specifics on your areas. But one is a need for a focus on additional training, especially around use of, or safe use of personal protective equipment and entering the homes. A number of folks commented on the need for some sort of upfront financing or other financing tools that can help folks bridge some of the economic challenges that are out there. In a number of different places, there was discussion of virtual inspections to help speed things up, and I want to get back to that in a second. A number of folks who suggested in various different areas change in compliance rules to take into account the new world order here, so to say, to take into account the fact that some of the compliance rules may be impossible to meet going forward, at least in the short term. And then a number of folks talked about virtual outreach out there. On virtual inspections, this is more of a broad request and not necessary for folks to respond to right here. I just want to lay out a challenge that the commission has with these sorts of issues. A lot of these inspections ultimately are about ensuring that these systems are installed safely and correctly, and that's safety for the homeowner, but it's also safety for the utility and the utility employees. And so moving to virtual inspections on a lot of these things, intuitively makes sense. And, I personally agree in a lot of places, it's probably a little overkill to have a utility employee come out there when there may be other means to do it. I think the same thing holds true with the need to have a utility employee come out to shut off power to change out the electric panel as well. However, because there's safety implications in there, the commission tends to be a little reluctant to directly order those things without a lot of evidence that we can do that without creating safety problems. So what I flagged to people is if there's best practices in other states, other jurisdictions out there where this happens, that's extremely useful for us to see that sort of information to kind of understand what the real world implications are. From there, I don't have any other specific questions because you guys were pretty good in your presentations there. I don't know if Commissioner Randolph and Commissioner Sharomer are still on the phone, but before we move on, do either one of you have questions?
This is Commissioner Randolph. I'm still here, but I don't have any questions. I found the specific suggestions really useful, and I'm looking forward to kind of talking through some of these with staff further. So I really appreciate all the work and thought that went into that discussion.
This is Genevieve. Yes, similar. I don't have any questions at this point. I just appreciate the diversity of views presented in both panels. And again, it really provides insights for us and hopefully some new ideas going forward. I know that we have somebody on the line from GoBiz. I just wondered if the representative from GoBiz might want to say a few words about any initiatives that they may be working on right now.
Yes, this is Hannah Goldsmith. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I actually sent Sarah a brief slide. I wonder if we could pull that up with some resources.
Yeah, I'll pull that up. It'll take a minute though.
Okay, so my name is Hannah Goldsmith. I'm the lead advisor for Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development in the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. So our office provides business assistance for California businesses or businesses that seek to relocate to California. And that includes site selection services, permitting assistance, incentive navigation, as well as other assistance. And so during this time, we are also assisting many businesses with COVID impacts. So you can reach out to our office for assistance and questions. I am more focused on the zero emission vehicle side, so I'm a little bit less in the loop on that, but I've provided some links here to help. So the first link is the general California COVID-19 one-stop shop website, which many of you have probably already seen. The second link is to our GoBiz coronavirus website, which includes a lot of information for employees and employers and all Californians. And we also update it with news from the governor, and you can sign up for our GoBiz newsletters, which have been going out with updates on COVID-19 business implications as well. Our office, specifically on the zero emission vehicle side, have been receiving a lot of feedback from businesses involved with zero emission vehicles and charging infrastructure and hydrogen refueling infrastructure on COVID-19 impacts. And so we have our own newsletter, and I would encourage folks to sign up for that. But in our last newsletter, which went out last week, we included a permitting survey for local governments. So we are asking local governments to fill that out so that we can better understand the impacts of the shelter in place and COVID-19 on permitting practices, particularly for charging and hydrogen infrastructure. As Alex and Abdallah have mentioned, there has been a lot of differentiation between jurisdictions in how this pandemic has impacted their permitting abilities. Many already had online permitting, but many do not. And so we've been working with jurisdictions to try to help them, excuse me, get that in place, because as other folks have mentioned, online permitting and virtual site inspection is helpful to keep these projects moving forward. So we have that survey out. We'll be able to share results and next steps from that. We are seeing a lot of engagement. And as Abdallah mentioned, we have our AB 1236 efforts to streamline permitting for charging station installation. And so we are still working with local jurisdictions to try to get those streamlined processes in place. And I don't want to take up too much more time, but my contact info is at the bottom of that slide. And thanks for having me. I'm happy to answer questions and help folks find resources.
Okay, great. Thank you. Time right now. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to public comment at this point in time. As per the first panel, if you have a comment, please raise your hand, and Mary Claire will open the mic for you. And if you had called in and don't have the ability to raise your hand, or if you're using a web browser and don't have the ability to raise your hand, you can say something in the chat function that you'd like to talk. I'll also let people know that we have set up an email address that folks that did want to comment and didn't get a chance to can send emails to. That email address is going to be covidresponse@cpuc.ca.gov. I'm going to ask either Mary Claire or Sarah Kamens to post that in the comments so people can see that. You should know that that email is in the process of being set up. So if you send an email to it in the next 10 minutes, it may bounce back. But sometime this afternoon, you can resend it at that point in time, and we'll receive it. So for that, let's go to public comment, and I'm going to do public comment until 12:38, and then end that just so we have 2 minutes to wrap up before 12:40.
Hey, Ed, this is Ted. Can I make a quick comment?
Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, in response to your question about virtual inspections, I think it's important that we distinguish there are two types of virtual inspections that under the kind of commission's purview. So there's interconnection inspections, and then there's like SJIP inspections, like to get your final kind of incentive claim for SJIP. And so the SJIP inspections have nothing to do with safety, so they should be easy to do without any kind of extra work. The interconnection inspections, California is actually already leading the country in that. And we STEM have done several dozen of these with Southern California Edison already. for over the last 2 years. So the utilities in California already know how to do these in certain situations, and we think that it should be relatively easy to expand that across the state.
That. And my point is that in some of that we understand, and we'll see a lot of that probably moving forward quickly anyway, since that was in motion before this. But as we look more and more to streamline it, to the extent that there's other states that have been doing it differently for a while, that's really useful information for us to understand. Okay, and Ed or somebody is actually sharing their whole screen, it appears.
Says it's Dennis. Dennis, are you sharing your screen?
If anyone is sharing their screen, please stop sharing your screen. In the meantime, the first question is from Brian Jones. Brian, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Brian from the Center for Sustainable Energy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So we at the Center for Sustainable Energy are a member of the SOMA Program Administration team. We also administer SGIP, CSI Thermal, and MASH programs in San Diego Gas and Electric territory. So a lot of our programs have been pretty heavily impacted. I wanted to thank all the panelists for the solutions they put forward. I think there are a lot of great ideas, many of which we've already been discussing with them prior to this workshop. We support a lot of these ideas, upfront payments, partial payments for progress and project milestones, things like that. I think I do want to just stress that a lot of these proposed changes would be changes to established program rules, many of which were put into place for a reason and have been vetted through the public process. So, you know, changing these rules does bring in a certain element of risk, and we can certainly act prudently and work to mitigate that risk and put in place solutions that are reasonable. But I think from our point of view, we want to make sure we're working very closely with PUC staff and decision makers to make sure that all parties are on board with accepting any additional risk that comes from making these changes that allow us to keep these programs functioning and keep incentive payments going to especially low-income customers that need it the most right now. And I wanted to highlight the need to be cognizant of the kind of timelines associated with the status quo regulatory process. So a lot of the solutions we need, ideally we'd like to implement them fairly quickly. So again, looking for ways to expeditiously implement solutions without necessarily shortcutting the public process, which is also very important. So potentially reduced review timelines, things like that. But just generally wanted to highlight that this needs to be a collaborative effort, and we as program administrators do need a certain amount of kind of direction and cover from the commission to be able to implement these changes, since we are bound by a lot of the regulatory process. Thank you.
All right, the next public comment is from Jody London.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jody London. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for Contra Costa County. And I just wanted to offer some thoughts about a lot of what I've heard today. This was a really great venue, and I really appreciate it. We're very interested in seeing our energy efficiency contractors, solar installers, et cetera, return to work. We participate very actively in the Bay Area Regional Energy Network. It's a great channel for us to bring these programs to our residents, particularly the many low-income residents that we have in the disadvantaged communities in our county. And we have to work with the county health officers. And I want to make sure that the PUC is aware of how critical those county health officers are. They are the ones who are really directing what happens at the county by county level. I also serve on the Oakland School Board. I'm the president of the Oakland School Board, and I can tell you that when we think about reopening schools, that happens collaboratively with the County Office of Education and the health officers. So as much as everybody wants things to get back to something, it's not going to go back, but to be different and have more people active in the economy, that the health piece is just really critical. And I don't know the relationship between the state health department and the county health departments, but I do know that county health departments have the ability to overrule and have precedence over the state level. So I just want to highlight that for you, and I'm happy to answer questions offline. I know that a lot of these topics have come up, and if I can be a resource, we're happy to do that. Thank you.
All right, the next comment is from Mona Tierney-Lloyd.
Hi, thank you very much for having these panels. It was really informative, and I think there were a lot of good proposals put forward on how to address some of the concerns that have arisen as a result of the COVID implications to our industries. I represent Enel North America. We have demand response, behind the meter energy storage, as well as electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Our industries across the board have been impacted by the COVID response to various degrees. I really want to thank all of the industry associations that have presented solutions today. We are largely in support of them and their proposals, from CISA, CALSA, the Efficiency Council, as well as EVCA. I also want to support the comments that Jody just made about implications on differences in essential designations between the counties and the state, and that having implications as well for demand response energy storage, as well as electric vehicle transportation, manufacturing, and installation. I did want to specifically support the comments that Ted Coe had made on demand response, and I think that the staff and the commission, if they can provide some latitude in terms of some of the performance obligations of these resources. I appreciate the utilities indicating their willingness to work with their partners, their demand response partners, but I think there will be some need for the commission to give direction on some of the performance obligations of these resources, and mainly from the perspective of we don't know how long this is going to continue to be in effect and the ongoing implications. So thank you again for your consideration of their comments.
All right, and the next comment is from Sarah Delisle. Sarah, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. All right, let's move on to the next comment, which is also the last comment. Matt Duesterberg. Matthew Duesterberg, you can unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me now? Thank you for this workshop. It was great. I was just curious kind of how the CPUC is going to kind of proceed with the next steps. I know a lot of companies are kind of reevaluating priorities and deprioritizing some things as there's so much new stuff going on. Is there kind of plans to provide more transparency on what's going to be deprioritized, if there's going to be a crack team that goes and tries to attack some of these solutions, or what kind of the next steps is? Are there going to be another workshop like this, or is that something to be told later?
Well, that may be a perfect question to close it all out and have me just take over for just a final summary. As I said at the beginning, what we will do with the information from this workshop is staff will put together, an options memo or options memos for the decision makers, and we'll figure out what the next steps on process-wise are there. So it's probably not a completely satisfactory answer at the moment. What I will say is we've been acutely aware on all of these issues to need to move fast, understanding that if, some solutions out there, if we don't implement those solutions in a pretty quick time frame, the value of that solution or the effectiveness of that solution goes away. So we're very aware of that and trying to move fast. And then we are very aware of the need to be transparent in both the decision-making process, both in terms of what we are deciding, but also in terms of the timelines we will decide it in, because we do understand, folks are making investment decisions right now, and without that transparency, it's a challenging thing to do. With that, I'll wrap up. I again want to thank Sarah and Mary Claire and all the panelists for putting this together today. Every time I get on a big WebEx meeting, I am now nervous of complete failure as we've moved into this new world. However, I think this was about as technically flawless of a WebEx or a Zoom meeting that I've done. That's definitely thanks to the work of the PUC staff, but that's also thanks to all the panelists as well. So thank you for your, both your efforts on being technically adept and your presentations as well. And just to wrap up, I want to just shift gears ever so slightly and just remind everybody out there to remember as you're out in public to social distance and to wear a mask. Remind folks that even if you feel like you yourself are not at risk, you should always consider yourself as a potential carrier and take those protective measures to protect everybody else. And also not just think about people's exposure to COVID-19, but think about people's stress levels and their anxiety levels. And that if you aren't wearing a mask and you aren't social distancing from people, you are likely increasing other people's anxiety levels around you out there. And the higher levels of anxiety and stress are not good for people's health, and they aren't good for society as a whole. So just on closing, just remember the rules. They're not there just to protect you; they're there to protect a lot of other people. And with that, thank you for participation, and let's close out.
All right, thanks everybody. It was great to see your faces. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.